It's such an honor and delight to be with you all globally today and sharing this space with these three amazing global mental health leaders. This is going to be an incredible conversation. We are looking forward to it at this particular historical moment. The time for this could not be any more essential and important as our need for moral and ethical clarity becomes even more important. And Dr. Samah Jabr's work is that opportunity for us to all reorient ourselves to our moral and ethical center. I have to apologize to Dr. Maté and Dr. Mullan for giving such a brief introduction, because these individuals, if I were to speak about their amazing work in history, would take the whole hour and a half. But Dr. Maté, as we know, is a physician, trauma expert, and author of The Myth of Normal. And Dr. Jennifer Mullan is a clinical psychologist and author of Decolonizing Therapy. And of course, the center of our discussion is going to be Dr. Samah Jabr and her work, which is truly extraordinary. What I'd like to do today to begin the discussion is give Dr. Jabr an opportunity to take us on a little journey. Take us on a little journey about how she got to this extraordinary work at this particular historical moment, to take us through her own journey, how she got here, and the importance of this book right now. Dr. Jabr, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And let me start by thanking Zaya, Mauricio, and the team of SAND, and all the speakers, and everyone who's joining us today, and everyone who registered for this encounter, and who shows an interest in continuing the discussion on Palestine. And in fact, I write to create a discussion on Palestine. My profession in medicine first and then in psychiatry brings me close to the experiences of people in Palestine. And as one Palestinian living under occupation, we feel the isolation, we feel misunderstood, and we feel the need to regain our agency and tell our story and share our narrative. This is important for emotional regulation, for processing our thoughts about the situation in Palestine. So I started writing for these reasons, for selfish reasons, and also driven by a sense of responsibility for the people who trust me on their stories. And actually, it's difficult for me. I don't have the luxury of time to sit and write a book from page 1 to the last page. So I write small pieces in a hurry, usually in reaction to things that provoke me emotionally or intellectually. And my style in writing is short pieces. I usually write them in a rush. I think of the theme, the story, as I drive back from one work to another. And I write them by the end of the day, just before sleeping. And with the help of several friends from Australia, from the US, Dr. Liz Berger, and my colleague Zainab, they collected the pieces and worked hard on getting this book published. So it is the opportunity for me, it's an opportunity for me to thank everyone who was involved in collecting, in creating and putting together this collection of articles.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jabr. Let me ask Dr. Gabor about your own journey to this particular historical moment, and then how you connected with Dr. Jabr and how it connects with your work.
Sure, thank you. Well, my first relationship to Palestine was as a Zionist. In my late teens, I joined the Zionist youth movement, and the return, so-called, which is historically a myth, but the return, so-called, of the Jewish people to Palestine served as an antidote to the anti-Semitism that my family had experienced, that I had experienced in Eastern Europe. And some years later, it was brought to my attention that there was another people there. It wasn't just a question of a return, it was a question of displacement of somebody else. And so that I understood in my early 20s. After I became a physician, I became very interested in the relationship between society, culture, health, individual health, psychological issues, physical, psychological, emotional, and mental health. And then during the first Intifada, I had opportunity to visit Palestine with a group called the Middle East Children's Alliance, which is based in California, funded by some wonderful Jewish people, actually. And so we visited the healthcare facilities throughout Palestine, including in Gaza and in the occupied West Bank, under occupation and under assault during the First Intifada. That was in the early 1990s. And of course, the situation was there then was incomparably better, if you can call it that, than what it has become since. I last visited Palestine in 2022 to work with women. This is in the West Bank, to work with women who'd been tortured in Israeli prisons and suffered post-traumatic stress disorder. And what struck me, and one of the questions I was going to ask Dr. Jabr is that when I talked to these women individually, even though they had suffered severe trauma, having been tortured in Israeli jails, um, their biggest concerns when they talked to me privately was actually about their relationship with their own families and their own and the men in their lives. And Dr. Jabr in her book talks about the impact of the occupation on gender issues and on family situations. And then finally, and and of course I followed the situation, the genocide and the horrors of the occupation and the ongoing daily terror that's going right now in the West Bank. And then I was asked to write the foreword to Dr. Jabar's book, which I was very happy to do. And, I said in the foreword that how can you approach this book with heartbreak and with reverence, and also as a call to action. And finally, what the book really and anybody who thinks that history began on October the 7th, some of these essays predate October the 7th, and they talk about long ongoing issues under occupation. So it's not about a response to just the recent genocide, it's a response to the whole history of occupation and what it has done to Palestinians and the Palestinian struggle, and Dr. Jabar's insistence that therapy, in a sense, is resistance. And what it's really all about, and what the book makes the book so important, is that Dr. Jabr talks about the assassination of Palestinian memory. And so we're not just talking about individual health issues, we're not even just talking about historical facts. We're actually talking about the deliberate and ongoing attempt to extirpate Palestinian experience from history. And so this book is such an important marker that can't be done. And the very fact that memory itself is resistance. So that's my relationship to this.
Thank
work.
you. Thank you, Dr. Jabr. Dr. Mullan, your work on decolonizing therapy, maybe you can speak with us a little bit about your own journey and how you got to this point and your connection to Dr. Jabr's book.
Yes, absolutely. One of the first things I'm thinking as we're talking is I can feel my body. I just want to name my truth in the moment. I can feel my body and my heart pulse. I can feel that what we're talking about is more than just a mental issue or an emotional issue, but a full body experience. And that is what I believe occupation, what racial trauma, what systemic gaslighting does. I would say as a multiracial Black woman who was raised in the States, my understanding of violence is shaped not only by the history of what is so-called US or Turtle Island, but of my family's histories of forced migration, of letting go of our own ancestral practices and ancestral intelligences, right? And really, in some ways, this need to become a little bit more, quote unquote, professional, refined, streamlined, white. And so my family's histories and histories of many communities who've lived within dehumanization, racism, displacement, and the long afterlife of colonization, which is alive and well, that those histories are not the same as the Palestinian experience. And I would never claim that they are, but they have taught me, I feel like we have been in a level of solidarity and this sort of helix figure eight of recognizing what happens when people's humanity is deeply denied, when our fields attempt to separate our grief and our rage and demonize and pathologize our grief and rage in particular. It is political, and this is why I've been saying for quite some time that everything is political. The psychological is political. The body, for many of us, is a political site. To hell with Democrat and Republican, what we're speaking about is a deep sense of like who has access, who does not. Why are we allowed this? Why are we not? And then that's when survival in itself becomes, I believe, a deep act of resistance. And so, being trained as a clinical psychologist over 25 years ago, I realized really quickly, working in the inner city, working in hoods, that I wasn't only treating anxiety or depression or burnout or trauma, that I was meeting people whose nervous systems had already adapted to surviving worlds that repeatedly told them that they were disposable, that they were unsafe. And for me, to be honest, that is when things started shifting, when I saw that there was nothing neutral about mental health and psychology, and decolonizing therapy became my deep, humble, and constant attempt, because I don't know if we're ever there, to attempt to widen this frame, right? But I'm constantly asking, like, who are we ethical to? And I think that Dr. Samah deeply does that as somebody who is, organized. My organizing happened in my maybe mid-20s, from California to New York, with Anakbai in New Jersey, the People's Institute of Survival and Beyond, and always Palestine and Gaza Strip was always at the center of the conversation, always being in relationship to co-conspirators and comrades that understand what I believe Dr. Samah's work reminds us consistently, is that we cannot separate the psyche from the political conditions that people are living inside of. And so whether we're talking about Palestine or other communities shaped by colonization, occupation, forced migration, or systemic oppression, I believe for many therapists, psychologists, social workers, those of us that are trying to move beyond these boxes today, like, how do we understand this suffering without erasing the context that is producing it? And what does being well look like when occupation and violence still happens today? And so Dr. Samah writes from within an occupied reality. And I believe that my work asks us to just consistently recognize that every single encounter we have, whether therapeutic, human engagement, also exists within deeply political realities.
Thanks for that, Dr. Jen. That is really incredible. And it seems like the discussion is already off to the races here, that there's so much alignment and consistency with everything that we've had just with the introduction. It seems to me that Palestine and Dr. Jabr's work is the lens through which we are going to transform our understanding as mental health workers globally right now. And what I'd like to do is really get at some of the major points in the book, in her book, that really illuminate, and you've all touched on it already. And this is this notion of the ahistorical notion of, working as mental health workers, right? Or the singular diagnosis of PTSD, which we all know is a rather ridiculous construct in the context of trying to understand the extent of the trauma in Palestine. The idea of a singular traumatic event and causing a single unitary psychiatric disorder makes no sense in the Palestinian context or with a lot of marginalized, dispossessed, and oppressed communities. And one of the beautiful things about your book, Dr. Samah, is the historical evolution that you speak about in terms of the evolution of the structural elements of oppression, starting from before 1948 with the mass ethnic cleansing of 800,000 Palestinians from 1947 to 1949, into the occupations, into the extended ethnic cleansing, to the genocide and what's happening right now. I wonder if you can speak a little bit about this reformulation of trauma, which is so brilliant that you've spoken about, and maybe help our community here, our global community, understand why that's so important.
Let me start by saying that I studied in Western institutions, Western psychiatry and psychotherapies. And when I returned back to Palestine, at the beginning, I started working as the psychiatrist responsible for the catchment area in Ramallah, working with an area for 400,000 people. And I remember the first day of my practice, I received 60 patients from 8 to 3. And so that was, I was coming from France. My chef de service received in a busy day 5 patients. So the big question for me was, how can I work in such a condition? And that forced me to learn more and theorize. And the most important lessons in my practice are the lessons that I learned from the patients. In Palestine, sometimes you don't see the autistic child, but you see the mother of 3 autistic children who would come. She cannot bring them because public transportation will not accept them, or she doesn't have enough cash to pay a private taxi. So I started working in a context completely different than the context where I studied. And that motivated me to rethink the education that I received and be ready to learn from the reality. I discovered the practice, and then I researched the different theories that might illuminate my practice. I started learning about liberation psychology in Latin America. I started reading Frantz Fanon and other theorists who worked in conditions different than the studies. And very quickly, it became clear for me that trauma theory, as presented in the West, best captures the experience of soldiers, and it doesn't capture the experiences of Palestinians. What our experience can best be described as colonial trauma, which is cumulative, cross-generational, collective, and intentional. And the intentionality is very important because it has an objective, the erasure of agency of people and forcing helplessness on us. So the CBT, trauma-focused CBT, prolonged exposure, these therapies will not answer the need that we have here. Under the umbrella term of colonial trauma, we saw over the past 2-3 years different shapes of trauma of humiliation, trauma of using sexual degradation and violence as a form of torture, trauma of starvation, which has specific consequences. So, with other colleagues, we started theorizing about an appropriate intervention for the trauma of humiliation, for the trauma of starvation, when your biology is being instrumentalized against your ideals. So I have to say that the one of the many lessons that I learned as a psychiatrist in Palestine, we don't theorize because we want to do the intellectual exercise. We theorize because we have an urgent need that we need to respond to. And I do everything in urgency in Palestine. My clinical work, my writings, my theorization. There is a need. Palestine is a very troubled place, but a very interesting place where we can learn from. I learned a lot, and I try to share this knowledge with colleagues outside Palestine. And in that, I minimize the isolation of Palestinians, but I also do my share as a person of the globe, trying to report and synthesize knowledge and wisdom from my corner in the world, from my positionality. That's what I try to do as much as possible.
Yes. Dr. Dr. Maté, I wondered if you could, go off of what Dr. Jabr just said in terms of thinking about, in light of your work and your understanding of Dr. Jabr's work, this reformulation and rethinking of trauma, and specifically the construct of PTSD as a result of, what we're learning more about, especially the genocide in Palestine. How is this reformulating and helping globally all of us rethink this construct?
Sure. Well, probably the most ridiculous document in history is the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. And as my colleague and friend, Dr. Dan Siegel from UCLA said, the DSM deals in categories, but not in pain. Now, in fact, if you look at any diagnosis, mental health diagnosis in the DSM, its foundational basis is pain, some kind of traumatic, painful experience that then manifests in a certain set of symptoms. So what the DSM does is it collects these symptoms and then calls them disease entities. And they think they're explaining something, but they're not explaining anything. They're just describing something. So PTSD specifically is a collection of symptoms. And it's a collection of symptoms that manifests itself in some people for sure. But post-traumatic stress disorder, nobody develops post-traumatic stress disorder, I should say the symptoms of it, sitting in a room all by themselves. The events that form their imprint in the physiology, in the mind, the brain, and the body of the person who suffers those symptoms happened in interaction with the world in a certain setting. And most of the time, actually, the original insult or the original wounding happened in childhood. And the DSM says nothing about that.
Right.
And whether you're looking at addictions or, there's a British psychologist, Dr. Richard Bentall, a member of the British Academy, who said that the relationship between childhood adverse experiences and adult mental health challenges is as clearly established scientifically as the relationship between smoking and lung cancer. But the average psychiatrist and many psychologists either never learn those connections. Now, in her book, Radiance, Dr. Jabr is very clear that you can't separate people's life experiences from their mental health conditions, and that the diagnoses themselves don't explain anything. So, I mean, one example that's dramatically lodged in my memory is an elderly man who comes to her, I think, with suicidal depression. He's being forced to demolish the home that he built with his own hands He's forced to demolish it with his own hands. You know what? And there's an article recently, I think in Haaretz, about how Palestinians in Jerusalem whose homes have been slated for demolition, they have to demolish it themselves. It's cheaper for them because if the government comes with their bulldozers, the Palestinian has to pay for the demolishing of his own home. So it's cheaper for them to demolish it with their own hands. So Dr. Jabr says, or raises the question, well, this person coming to me, this elderly man, nearly 80 years old, I think, or close to it, who comes to me with this situation, well, am I supposed to treat him like an isolated case of so-called depression? No, clearly his mental state is related to his life experience. And so that the book throws very sharp and focused light on the relationship between people's experience and their mental health conditions, which is what the DSM never does. And so that's why this book is not only a revelation and an exploration of the Palestinian experience under occupation, it's actually a challenge to our received opinions about what constitutes mental health and so-called mental illness. And in fact, you know, if there's an essential message, or one of the essential messages in the book is that these so-called mental health conditions are actually normal responses to abnormal circumstances. And that's universal. And I make that point in my book, The Myth of Normal. That's what the title means. You know, that what we consider to be normal in this society is actually completely inhuman and abnormal. And again, Dr. Jabr's book is a very sharp reflection of that perspective.
Yeah, and maybe Dr. Mullan, if you could, I mean, I know you took you were very careful to say that the Palestinian experience and the Black experience, it's, you know, that they're very different, but they are historically, there's a lot of alignment in terms of the structural elements of trauma, the historical, multi-generational aspects. In reading Dr. Jabr's book and your own work in your communities and your own work on decolonizing therapy, how does that sit with you in terms of your work on thinking about what trauma is?
Yeah, I really co-sign and can really felt what Dr. Gabor and Dr. Samah are saying. And what really shows up for me is this understanding on a core level that trauma isn't only what happened, right? And it's how people respond to us or don't respond when that happening happens as well. And it isn't only what parents failed to do. I've often found, and it's really why decolonizing therapy was written, because I was running years of group and seeing thousands of people and doing my own work and trying to piece myself back together as well from my familial, environmental, intergenerational shit. and having this realization also that some of what kept showing up in me and the people that I was serving, wasn't just about us. As Dr. Gabor was saying, this isn't just about symptom management. I often like to say, and I talk about this in the book, I'm really big on the word expressions. I think it's much more humanizing and much more allowing of us to be able to see the ways in which our nightmares or our overwhelm or not being able to get out of bed isn't a failure. It isn't a personal failure, but rather it is also part of surveillance, right? Displacement, the occupation. And so I think when we individualize trauma, consciously or not, Western therapy, Eurocentric therapy, has historically, intentionally and unintentionally at times, erased systems, right? It consistently erases systems and socializes us, right? To consistently ask people of the global majority or people that are being oppressed or forgotten to adapt. Yeah, and I think that mental health has too often been asking of us and asking people to tolerate conditions that should never be tolerated. And so I want to uplift Roberto and Bonnie Durand and Dr. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart often talk about the soul wound, and talk about historical trauma and it being not behind us, that it breathes not only through us, through what we understand personality to be, but also through institutions, through policy, through education, through media, through transportation systems, right? And so colonization is not just an event. It is a nervous system organizing principle, right? And I believe that Dr. Samah's book and Palestine and Palestinian folks reveals something universal to all of us, right? It is very unique in its history and reality. I think it reveals these mechanisms of domination recognizable across all colonized people, right? I think Palestine, when we say we are Palestine, you know, when you're seeing millions and billions of people on social media having problems eating, saying, what can I do? I feel stuck. Something has to happen, not being able to function. We don't want to do business as usual. This is not just, in my humble, loving opinion, a intellectual exercise, yeah? This is a like, we stand 10 toes down for Palestine because Palestinians have done the same for us, right? And this is also, this connects Black communities, migrant communities, the violence of ICE, right, from migrant communities, in particular Chicano populations, right, that are being picked apart. Who gets to be a migrant and who doesn't? And so I want to just name this colonial soul wound is what I identify it as. I believe that Dr. Samah's talking about this constantly and beautifully in Radiance and Pain and Resilience, because the colonial soul wound is the injury created when these systems, these structures sever us from ourselves, from one another, from our ancestors, from our cultures, from our land, and from our inherent sense of dignity and belonging. And I think that that's what the Israeli machine has attempted to do, is psychologically, energetically, emotionally disengage and dismantle Palestinians from their land and beingness. And what I love is that there is a hell no. We will not. That is not going to happen. You are not going to excommunicate us from our relationship with one another, from our relationship with peoples that don't even know us overseas, you know, from our culture, from our spirit, from Allah, from our politics, right? So colonization doesn't only occupy land, it attempts, lovingly, it attempts to occupy identity. And I believe that Dr. Samah and so many others that, as she mentioned, supported her in writing and birthing this book have said, absolutely not in our watch. Watch us do this and watch us be well for 10 generations after us.
Yeah, I actually want to go a little bit more in that direction. I myself am a son of Nakba survivors. So the idea of generational trauma and how collective trauma moves intergenerationally and impacts communities is something that's very, very, very interesting and a very kind of compelling thing for us to kind of take on now as a group, because, you know, as Dr. Maté says, I mean, the DSM-3 is painfully and catastrophically inadequate in addressing that, you know, in so many ways. So I wonder, Dr. Jabr, if you could speak a little bit about this notion of collective trauma, how it moves intergenerationally, and then maybe we can start this discussion about the impact of that understanding, how it is on how we can approach individuals, families, and communities in the healing process.
Maybe I can take it into two different dimensions. It goes from one generation to another, and because the occupation is ongoing and the oppression is escalating in Palestine, it's really difficult to dissect and say this symptom belongs to your grandfather or to your father, the grandfather who was dispossessed from his home, who lost his wealth in Ain Karim and became a refugee somewhere. Or your father who protested against this and went to prison and was tortured, or to you, the young person who lost classmates or who was shot at by soldiers. So it is, if I may say, a traumatogenic atmosphere.
Yes.
That and we are all breathing in this atmosphere. And it is difficult to differentiate where the origin of the symptom, where does it come from exactly? So that's one dimension. But there is also the collective aspect.
Yes.
Colonial trauma doesn't only target masses of people across the history of Palestine, across the history of the occupation of Palestine since the Balfour Declaration until today. It also targets relationships between people. So I see that the task of mental health professionals and their supporters in the help professions, who are not necessarily highly specialized people in mental health, is not only to help the individuals, but also to deal with the broken relationships, to heal the damaged social fabric. If you look at the Palestinian reality, the Palestinian people are very fragmented. We have the Palestinians in Jerusalem, Palestinians in the West Bank. In the West Bank, we have area A, B, C. There is Gaza, and now in Gaza, beyond the yellow line, inside the yellow line,
Yes.
the Palestinians with Israeli citizenship and in diaspora. And for each community, there are different political and social determinants of health that impact their well-being and mental health in a different way. So, for example, if you think of the Israeli Arab community, the so-called Israeli Arab community, crime is very high because, you know, when the oppressor is inaccessible, people start expressing the internalized violence horizontally. So feminicide is very high, domestic violence is very high in different Palestinian communities. So we need to take care of the cross-generational, intergenerational trauma that is passing not only through the narrative, but also through the epigenetics. And through the silence sometimes, if the grandparents don't tell us about it and the younger generation cannot figure out the broken attachment, where does it come from? But there is also a lot of damage that is happening to the social fabric. And when we design interventions in Palestine, we move more and more towards imitating the organic opportunities to contain and heal in the Palestinian community. The collective aspect is important. People go to prayer because they pray as a collective. People, when they dance the dabke, they hold hands of each other. We need to imitate them and create opportunities where people meet in listening groups, in healing circles, and support each other. And the therapist will be a facilitator and allow people to help themselves, receive help and give help to others. We need to do this not only because it is cost effective, given the very small number of specialized mental health professionals in Palestine, but also it is the most appropriate thing to do, given the kind of trauma that we experience, not because I am Samah, not because of something that I did, simply because I belong to this group of people. So it's better to be reprocessed collectively with other people. And now in Palestine, we create opportunities for journalists to meet and support each other, for health professionals to meet and support each other, ex-detainees, women ex-detainees, adolescent ex-detainees, wives of men who are detained and who are left to deal with the troubles of the family alone. So we don't consider these people as sick. They don't need a category, a diagnosis. we support people according to the common experience that wounded them.
Yes.
And we create a group intervention for them.
Yeah, that's really brilliant. And I'm going to ask you maybe to expand on that a little bit, because what you're suggesting is a radically different role for mental health workers, mental health professionals, a radical rethinking, a revolutionary way of thinking about what our role is, how we approach the work, and what we do with the people that we're trying to help heal in some way. And I think what you're articulating is something that's truly extraordinary. And maybe you can just elaborate on that a little bit. What is the role then in this context for mental health workers?
I have to say that we don't need a highly specialized mental health professional to facilitate a group like this.
Yes.
We train many people in the helping profession. Across my work in Palestine, across the years of my work, I trained general doctors, nurses, midwives. I trained school counselors. We created an effective school-based mental health program in Gaza. It was very modest, but very effective. And in the West Bank as well. I trained Aikido coaches, sport coaches, ex-detainees, adults to support adolescents who just come out of political detention. So we train members in the community, usually with experience and the sense of helping others, to provide this kind of support. And usually when we implement community interventions like this, certain people will realize within these groups, will realize that they need more help.
Yes.
And sometimes the facilitators can identify the people who need more help. And I would say in some experiences that we had in Gaza, where we established a school-based program to support children in groups, 30% of the children who participated in the groups, they required individual therapy later on. So they will be referred to more specialized mental health specialists, psychotherapists, clinical psychologists, or psychiatrists for further assessment. But if the assumption that everyone should go to the psychiatrist or to a highly specialized mental health professional is a big mistake. We cannot do it. And most of the people, 70% of these people, will benefit from supportive group and containing environment that can be created. And we help designing it, we help training the facilitators to do this kind of work, and we are ready to receive the individuals who need further interventions.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I really do. And it really speaks to a profound rethinking of the role of health workers, not just mental health workers, but health workers in general, in working in communities that have this kind of rupture in relationships with one another and amongst one another. So I wonder, Dr. Maté, if you could, do you want to, can you go off of that discussion and thinking about the role of health workers, either, medical workers, mental health workers? This really suggests that we've been off base for a long time, and we really need to think our roles.
Yes, the Western attitude, and I think Dr. Jen would agree with me, is very much a hierarchical, colonial-based perspective on health and health delivery. And so that the almost caricature, but also very clear expression of it is, say, classical psychoanalysis, where somebody lies on a couch and they emote and they stream of consciousness speak, and then the analyst analyzes what's happening for them over years. And so the analyst's expertise and insights, which are often ridiculous, is supposed to provide the cure. But there's no empowerment for the client themselves at all.
Right.
And this is very, I mean, it's not as egregious as all that, but it's still a hierarchical model. And it robs the individual or the community of agency. So it's a colonial-based model. Now, the American black psychologist, Dr. Kenneth Hardy, speaks about the assaulted sense of self. And the assaulted sense of self is the view of oneself that the oppressed minority or group adopts based on how the oppressor sees them.
Mm.
So in the Myth of Normal, I called Malcolm X, who himself went through this. He used to conk his hair to make it more straight so it wouldn't have the curliness that, you know, African hair has. And then at some point after he woke up, he said, he talked to an audience, who taught you that the shape of your lips was ugly? Who taught you that the how your hair was inappropriate, that your skin was too black? And so that's a social impact of oppression and racialization. But then, and here's when I ask both I'd like to ask Dr. Samah and first Dr. Jen a question, like what you said about violence, intra-community violence, Dr. Samah, is also what we see in oppressed minorities in North America, including the black community. And then the brilliant white analysis is that the problem is the breakdown of the black family. You know, well, what caused the breakdown of the black family? And so that's on the one hand, but on the other hand, and Dr. Jen, you might be able to, you will be able to comment on this with more experience than I have. I often hear that there's a kind of resistance to therapy and help within the black community. It's seen as kind of a weakness, and people would rather rely on their religion or whatever. So I'm wanting both of you. I'm sure there's this assaulted sense of self in Palestinian society as well. It's hard to imagine that it isn't. How both of you, I'm asking you, how do you find an openness to therapy that's not hierarchical, but nevertheless addresses the issues?
Mm.
How do you deal with that question? That's my question to both of you.
That's really great. Dr. Jen.
Sorry about that. Great question. And I'm just like soaking all of this in. I would even, right off the bat, I think to myself, we fully show up for it. And I think it's a combination of, and I'm going to explain what I mean by that. It is a combination, I think, what Dr. Samah has been saying in terms of folks turning on themselves and the fear and this assaulted self. When you bring all of this together, what I keep seeing and feeling is that we don't know where to put this anger at times, you know, and I can't speak for the entire community or all folks of color, all Black folks everywhere, but what I can speak to is this sense of, you know, it's easier to look at someone that is dealing with the same issues as me, that looks like me, that walks like me, that is engaged with me, and have all of this anger and rage poured into it, then take this risk, right? And we have been so conditioned and socialized to also believe that we're the problem. You know, and that's part of what I think the conditioning has done and what our education systems have done is make us feel, and our mental health systems, right? I've been part of the problem, you know, trained as a Western psychologist, like in this very specific little box and realm. It's though I have to change something. I'm wrong. There's a problem with me. And so I'm finding in particular that Black and brown communities are much more open to therapy and healing and wellness when also the people that are doing the helping and the healing get to fully show up and not hide behind this like professionalism, AKA get closer to whiteness, right? But fully show up in whatever your religion is, whatever your spirituality, your queerness. And so this is why I talk about in decolonizing therapy that, you know, the past, the political, the psychological, and the people are all pillars of the work that we can't separate them and they shouldn't be separated. And I don't think that we can CBT respectfully. Shout out to all my CBT therapists, that we can't like think our way out of problems that hypothetically the master has created, right? And so I think Dr. Naeem Akbar, right, the psychological chains of slavery. Ooh, I fan person about Dr. Naeem Akbar, and I don't think we talk about Dr. Naeem Akbar or not. And he's really helped me to understand how healing is not just about treating symptoms, but it's also about recovering memory. It's also about recovering dignity, cultural wisdom, and this capacity to define ourselves outside of systems that are sought to deeply define us. And so that is my very impassioned answer to this. And short and sweet, what I want to say is, I think we keep showing up in all of our bigness and all of our messiness. I think it's important for helpers, for providers, for community members, for peer support members, for it not to just be on psychologists and therapists, because we have harmed a lot. Until we know better, then we do better. But I do think that the invitation is that we invite our ancestry, our culture, sometimes food, song, celebration, and the mess of our relationship with one another into our therapeutic spaces, and connect with this shared principle of not just wanting to survive, but really, really MFing thrive. Yeah, I answered the question.
I was going to jump in and say that CBT is a good name, colonial behavior therapy.
I'll echo that one. And I think it's like Dr. Jen said, as if you can think your way out of systemic, historical, and generational trauma, as if you can just change a thought and you'll feel better, is such a bizarre colonial attitude anyways, right? And yet it's what insurance companies pay for. Dr. Jabr, would you like to expand on anything from that?
Yeah. So there are two consequences for untreated colonial trauma. One of them is increased prevalence of domestic violence. When the oppressor is inaccessible, people express it against the closer at home. And there is fratricide, the fighting between the comrades. And usually this is triggered by the divide and rule policy. So if we treat humiliation and the consequences of humiliation, we will reduce domestic violence. For fratricide, we need to treat humiliation, but also we need to borrow things from Latin America liberation psychology, like conscientization, raising political awareness among people, so that they will understand the mechanisms that inject and instill fratricide as a dynamic to deal with opinion difference and different agendas within one nation. We need to understand that it happens. Usually these tragic consequences are used as an evidence for the lesser nation, for the lesser nature of the occupied nation. But we need to understand how they are manufactured. We need dialoguing. So I claim that the healing circles and listening spaces that we establish now while we are dealing with the traumatic consequences, the collective consequences of trauma, will help us confront fratricide and domestic violence. Borrowing conscientization, the concept of conscientization, and dialoguing, and all the time emphasizing the need to not replicate the tools and the dynamics of the oppressor among ourselves. So those are just a few ideas. We see it in other population. For example, you probably You are probably aware now that the Israeli occupation is using Plan B in Gaza, where they financed and armed the people who were involved in um, civil crimes in Gaza
Yeah,
previously.
right.
They freed them from prisons, they demolished prisons, they freed some people, and they are recruiting them to fight the people in Gaza. They did that in South Lebanon in the past with the Antoine Lahd army. The French colonialism did it with the Harki in Algeria. You probably know the story, the history surrounding the assassination of Lumumba in Congo. So this is a well-established strategy by colonial systems, and that political awareness at least will liberate people from believing that okay, we are of a lesser nation, we of a lesser nature, and we cannot manage our problems in a civilized way. We will understand that this is being fabricated, and we will find political plus mental health strategies to respond to the question of fratricide. And I see this as a priority in Palestine. And my work in psychiatry is not limited to treating people, the individuals who suffer, but also it is the contribution to this understanding and to healing the damaged social fabric of the community is a real contribution to the liberation of Palestine. We need to liberate people's minds because colonialism means both the occupation of the land and the damage to the social fabric. And our response should not be restricted to liberating the land of Palestine, but also to liberating Palestinian minds as well.
Well, on that very deep and profound analysis, thank you, Dr. Jabr. That was fantastic. That's a transition point for us. We've been in dialogue for about an hour now. We have about 30 minutes left, and I have about 100 more questions for all of you, which we don't have time for. But we would like to see if there may be some questions from our global audience and our global community that we might be able to take on. So I'm going to go to our amazing team that's been organizing all this. And do we have some questions that seem really compelling and interesting right now that we can take on, or should I just? Yeah, okay.
Yes,
Go for it.
Few questions, please write them in the chat. We will not have probably time to bring people on screen. So this is Fema. She is currently training to be psychotherapist, and I'm a racialized person. My grandparents are Kashmiri. I'm looking forward to reading the book. I find that my training, conversation, and teachings around decolonialism are suppressed. When the topic of Palestine comes up, it's considered too political. However, there are always communications around events like October 7. Some of my clients face trauma around race and oppression. What can be done to navigate this without being institutionally traumatized?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant question. Thank you for sharing it. I mean, I'm going to take facilitator prerogative here for a minute and start the discussion by saying my approach to this is to bring political discussion and political analysis as part of training to become a mental health worker, to become a healer, that this somehow Western sanitized view that we put politics outside and compartmentalize it and not make it part of our training is frankly rubbish. It's a way to be part of the colonized project. So we, as part of our process, we need to take ownership of our training. We need to take ownership of those spaces. And of course, it should be an indispensable part of our training that we get a political analysis. But Dr. Jabr, what do you think about what's happening globally. Every time, and I hear this in the United States, I hear it in Africa, I hear it even in the Middle East, I hear it in, Central and South America, this prohibition against speaking about Palestine as part of our professional training. What do you have to say about that?
It has been there for many, many years. Anthropologist Rosemary Sayek spoke about the exclusion of Palestine and the Palestinian Nakba from trauma genre in Western literature about trauma. Mental health institutions have used the pretext that of neutrality to silence Palestine, and this was exposed during the war on Ukraine, because it was permitted to talk and support Ukraine and say all bad things about Russia. But I think this hypocrisy became even worse over the past 2-3 years. We know several colleagues, medical doctors or mental health professionals, who were suspended, whose writings were rejected because they referred to the events in Gaza as genocide, or simply because they criticized the silence about the political and social determinants of health and mental health for Palestinians. And I think I would describe this as institutional betrayal and complicity of mental health institutions. And I know that mental health institutions who were silent about apartheid starting to catch up after 94 and criticizing apartheid, but that was a big shame. It is important not to lose hope and continue creating our alternative opportunities.
Yes.
to bring awareness of Palestine in relation to health and mental health. And this meeting is one example. And this book is a tool to bring discussion about the mental health of Palestinians. One of the stages, there is one theory about genocide that suggests that genocide has 10 steps, and the last step is denial. And mental health institutions have been contributing to the denial, with every paper rejected because of its position on of Palestine. Because of its position on Palestine, there is an institutional denial of the political reality. All the silence about the catastrophe that happened to the health system in Gaza, the killing of over 1,700 medical staff in Palestine, this deafening silence is part of the problem. And I think even within the West, even when it is not concerned to Palestine, you should be concerned about medical and mental health institutions who want to reduce us to practitioners who implement guidelines and protocols and care less about the human condition. That's a very dangerous thing, very dangerous reduction of the role of a doctor or a health professional. In Arabic language, village people call a doctor or a person who cares for the health of others Hakim, which means a wise man. Why? Because they expect this person to be able to implement guidelines and protocols and care about the human condition and the wellness of people. And I think we should bring this conceptualization of the role of a health professional back to life in the face of the reduction that institutions want for us.
Yeah. Brilliant. Gabor, do you want to, oh, Jen, do you want to say something about that?
I did quickly. I was just feeling so, again, so full. I'm very body sensitive. And right away, I thought to myself, I think that I say this lovingly to my students, like the fields, our fields of mental health, the mental health industrial complexes need to analyze itself. They need to do their own psychoanalysis and analysis on itself, right? And really take a long, hard look. And I say this to all my students, like all of us are going to harm in some way, shape, or form. But what else is possible? What else is possible when we put down this concept of people just being unwell, that people are their symptoms? You know, as Dr. Gabor was saying with this DSM, I would often joke that sometimes the only way the DSM is even slightly permissible is if we have cultural context next to every single diagnostic category and tool, and it's impossible. And so I believe what our fields, if we want to stay alive and thriving, humbly, what I want to say is what I think we need is to bring humanization back again, because we are consistently dehumanizing one another, ourselves. How many mental health professionals are not just burned out, but soul dehydrated, soul exhausted? How many of us, I remember having 10, 15 people, having a 98 person wait list, right? And thinking to myself, okay, I'm talking to people saying, I'm gonna eat, I'm gonna take a little nibble while we're talking. And they're like, please, Dr. Jen. And that is how it became reciprocal, right? Is the humanity in the space, not just of those that we are helping, but the humanity of those of us that are also consistently giving. And I know within my own lineages, a lot of the people, I think this role of like the therapist or the helper was very much the shaman and the babalao and the imam and the, right? Like we back when, and certainly still today, would go into the villages after somebody came back from war and from fighting. And also we would be cared for. There would be food for us. Maybe they would wash our clothes and we're staying there for months, taking care. So I think that the humanity needs to be brought back in. And I feel like I'm consistently reminding my students and myself of that. And I also jotted down, right? Everything is political, whether somebody has clean running water, whether or not, you know, their pronouns are utilized, whether or not day laborers are seen as full humans and can afford the houses that they build. Like, we could keep going on. I think it not political when we have the privilege, and the privilege is not conscious of how deeply hard it is to just survive on a daily basis when the minimum wage doesn't meet the living wage. And then one of the last things I wrote down is to organize. And I don't just mean that in a like organize, you know, get out there. You can, that can be part of it, but also building relationship. And I think Dr. Samah's book consistently speaks to that, right? That it is the relationship that heals. And Rogers didn't come up with that. Right? Like many of our indigenous peoples already knew that it was the relationship that is healing. And I think that that's what Radiance and Pain and Resilience is saying, that we can build relationship with somebody that is doing transportation, with someone that is handing out food, with someone that is tending to our physical wounds, that they also are healers. And I think that is how our field needs to shift. And maybe perhaps that is how our teaching needs to shift in perspective as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Gabor, do you want to add anything to this? This is a really critical discussion here.
Yeah, very briefly. It's just a fact that the Israeli experience is front and center in the media and the culture, like the hostages that were taken. And, you know, one can empathize certainly with their suffering, but nobody mentions that there are 10,000 Palestinian hostages at any one time who are being starved and tortured and humiliated in Israeli prisons. And people that talk about that do face sanctions. And, you know, we both know doctors who've lost their positions, including in California, for speaking out on these issues. Dr. Rupa, a mutual acquaintance of ours, but others, and here in Canada as well. And I've often said that, and I've had personal attacks and some cancellations, but fundamentally, my position is that the only reason they can't fire me is because I don't have a job. If I did, I would have been fired by now. I'm past that. But I'm going to mention in closing two books that I like to reference in relation to Dr. Summers' book. One is When the World Sleeps by Francesca Albanese. And Francesca is the UN
Yes.
rapporteur for the occupied territories. Her book, When the World Sleeps. Now, she's sanctioned by the US right now. She can't even collect royalties on her book. I mean, it's just, the punishment that she's receiving is beyond anything. But her book, When the World Sleeps, details the Palestinian experience from a very close observer's point of view, including the Palestinian children and what's it like to be a child in Palestine, what's it like to be an adult. So that's one book I'd like to recommend to people is When the World Sleeps by Francesca Albanese. The other is by Mohammed Al-Kurd, and it's called The Perfect Victim. And Mohammed is a young man who grew up in Jerusalem, and he, just as Dr. Jabr describes, he lost his home to some settlers from the U.S. And he writes something beautiful, which I think is worth pondering. And he says, a universality that recognizes the Palestinian condition. He's calling for universality that recognizes the Palestinian condition is the human condition. So as Palestine goes, so goes humanity. Palestine is a microcosm of the world, wretched, raging, fraught, and fragmented, on fire, stubborn, ineligible, dignified. The lens that we lend the Palestinian reveals how we see each other and how we see everything else.
Couldn't say it any better. Both those books are amazing. Thank you for mentioning it, Gabor. Do we have another question that we can bring up now?
Yes, so maybe I will summarize a couple of questions about Dr. Samah's approach. So how do you train therapists in Palestine and Gaza? What is your approach is one question that occurred multiple times. And another one is about health workers in Gaza being asked to stay neutral to get funding. How would they support their communities in the grievance? And a few people wanted to know more about decolonizing Palestinian minds, what you had specifically in mind.
So maybe I will share something about my work in Gaza. So I started as a clinician and I continued working as a clinician, but I was also involved for many years in policy planning in mental health, supervising mental health activities across the West Bank mainly, but also coordinating national strategies with Gaza. That took me to Gaza on several trips to meet colleagues there. We developed a national suicide prevention strategy, child and adolescent prevention strategy. And I was involved in training emergency room doctors at the governmental hospitals on suicide prevention because we consider emergency room teams, doctors and nurses, as gatekeepers for suicide prevention. Usually people with suicidal attempt arrive to emergency room and they treat them effectively. If they don't make warm referral to a mental health professional later, they will fall in the cracks of the mental health system. I also trained many almost a large majority of primary health doctors on the MH gap. That's a special kit by WHO that equips the doctors and nurses working in primary health with the necessary competencies to identify and treat people with common mental health conditions like depression, panic attacks, anxiety, and so on, and refer more severe cases to the psychiatrist. So it is not one approach. I think we implement certain programs that are culturally relevant, contextually appropriate, knowing that the number of psychiatrists in Palestine doesn't exceed 30. It's a very small number. And the need is huge. And the budget allocated for mental health does not exceed 1% of the budget of the health sector. That's a very, very small amount of money. And the health sector consumes no more than 13% of the budget. And for the third year since the Israelis denied the Palestinian Authority the tax money, the health system has been affected severely. People work part-time, and it's impacting our work. Still, we need to do a lot of work. So we rely a lot on the good intentions of ordinary people. I want to mention this moment when 2 weeks after the beginning of the extreme violence in Gaza, I was involved in the creation of a crisis, mental health response to crisis. We had a ready plan, and usually we expected a small scale crisis, and people were trained to respond to that, how to distribute the medication, how to reach out the people who cannot come to the health sector. That would work for a smaller scale crisis like the one we had in 2014, 2021. So within 2 weeks, we saw everything that we established crumbling. The only psychiatric hospital, all community mental health centers, all our colleagues became homeless, and the system fell down completely. The plan that we prepared didn't work. So that was a moment of humbleness for me and my colleagues who were supporting this plan. And we started observing people creating their community support, community kitchen, for example. The head of the psychiatric hospital, he brought some colleagues and went under the rubble of the hospital to recover some of the boxes for medication. So people started working and putting themselves in the service of others organically. So I want to say that there is no evidence-based approach that I can claim suitable for Palestinians. We work in emergency situation. We do the things that are culturally, contextually relevant and make sense to us. And we get feedback from people, and we are very flexible in changing our strategy according to the emerging needs and the emerging challenges that we face. So at the beginning, people started moving their clinics, creating a WhatsApp group, telling everyone how to locate the psychiatrist. Then they rented some containers. The containers were demolished. They went to tents. And during COVID, we trained every health professional to provide support, like teletherapy. With no internet in Gaza, it became impossible. So rigidity. I know this when I was trained by important Western experts of certain therapies. They kept warning us: you have to be loyal to the protocol, to the module. You have to be loyal to this kind of therapy. But what I teach my colleagues: don't be loyal to the protocol. Be responsive, flexible, and do what makes sense and what is available to you, what's possible for you at that particular time. So we are doing the art of the possible.
Yeah, I would say be loyal to your community and to the people that you're working with, not to the protocol. This has been an extraordinary hour and a half, and I want to humbly express my deep gratitude to Dr. Jabr, Dr. Maté, Dr. Mullan, and to the organizers. This has been extraordinary. I feel like we could have gone on for hours, and inshallah, maybe we will at another time. In the very, very short time we have left, Dr. Jan, Dr. Maté, and then we'll end it with Dr. Jabr. What's the one small thing you'd like to leave everybody with today? Dr. Jan, you get to go first.
Oh, this is excruciating. One small thing. I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Brevity is not my strong suit. Okay, let me see if I can do this.
Me too.
Let me see if I can do this. I think what my soul and spirit wants to say right now is that the body is always talking and asking questions. And every cell is continuously asking, am I safe enough to grow, or do I need to survive? And the body often answers survive, and survival changes biology. And so with that, may we shift that biological mechanism, and may we realize that we are the antidote. Our relationship with one another is the antidote to the collective historical trauma and crisis, that we need you and I need you.
Bravo, bravo. Dr. Maté.
Sure. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I took part in a discussion with two Palestinian medical colleagues, Dr. Barghouti from the West Bank and Dr. Tarek Lubani, who's a Palestinian Canadian physician who's worked in Gaza. And what Dr. Lubani said, he mentioned, Dr. Barghouti said, is that existence is resistance. So just by continuing to exist, the Palestinians are resisting the attempt to extirpate them as a people. Dr. Lubani gave a very interesting statistic. He said that, it is known that at least 20,000, but probably many more children have been massacred in Gaza, and who knows how many are under the rubble. And recently, Ralph Nader, the famous political and economic advocate, estimated that the number of deaths are probably in the hundreds of thousands once we actually look at the people under the rubble and the underreporting and so on. But Dr. Lubani, who's worked repeatedly in Gaza, gave the statistic that, yes, there's a 20,000 reported deaths of children, but at the same time, over 80,000 children have been born, which is an incredible statistic if true. And I don't have reason to question it, so that life just wants to go on.
Yeah.
And the very continuance of life under conditions that most of us in our worst nightmare can't even imagine. What a tribute that is to human resilience, and also specifically to Palestinian resilience. And so that I tend to get a bit pessimistic about the future at times, and they're telling me, don't be pessimistic, because we're gonna go on.
Absolutely. Dr. Jabr, thank you for everything, and please.
Thank you. Thanks to send to everyone here. Keep the discussion about Palestine in bad times, in good times. Palestine has many gifts to the world, even though it's a very troubled place. And one of those gifts is the possibility to revolutionize our profession in a better way. So help us synthesize and export knowledge from our reality to different parts in the globe.
Inshallah. Beautiful statement. Thank you all. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to our global community who joined us today. It's been an extraordinary hour and a half, and I hope that we can continue it. Thank you all very much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Gratitude. Thank you. And just a small announcement before we leave. We will be hosting a course with Dr. Samah starting on July 5th, Decolonial Mental Health Practice, Clinical and Ethical Insights from Palestine, So please join us if you can. And the proceeds from today's conversation will be going to Project Hope Palestine. They're providing vital aid for educational materials, clothing to 500 orphan children in El Baraka orphan camp in Gaza. So thank you for your participation, for your presence, and we'll continue gathering and speaking and organizing for Palestine and for our collective liberation. Thank you, everyone.